Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. Here with Josh.
Hey, how's it going?
Josh, you know all about cults, and I'm very curious on to why are you so fascinated with them?
W- Honestly, I think especially nowadays with everyone getting so divided and um, separating into groups and stuff like that, it's important to see that almost anything can be regarded as a cult, and just keeping that in mind. So I think it's fascinating, and that everyone should learn about that kind of stuff.
I think it's
Um,
the whole fact of you just said it, getting into groups. That's
yeah.
everybody's, lemon peach pie, I would say. Everybody wants to get into a group and do stuff. I started looking at the world now. Everything is a cult. I was talking trash on the Freemasons because it's like it's a dumbed down version of what the cult used to be. And then I had Aaron, who's a blacksmith, come out and tell me in the middle of a podcast, "You're going to be surprised, but I'm a Freemason." I'm like, so many questions because I started looking and I messaged you. It was a little joke I wanted to tell you about was the fact of it's spread through us from elementary school,
Oh
separating
yeah.
into sports teams, classifications based on things that have the same interest as you. All the times we made hand turkeys in red paint. That was, and we put them on the window. That's like, it's the blood of the Native Americans. It's like, hang on a second. That's more. It's like there's always a deep meaning behind it. I think it's needed to have a cult, but I also think people are way too malleable. I think I heard Adam Egget, who's like a comedian. He did the Norm Macdonald show when it was on like Netflix, if you want to watch that. But that guy,
Yeah.
he was in one of the biggest cults called Sea-Doo, which they would talk about, they would leave him in the desert in Joshua Tree with just a little pitcher of water for like 3 days. Like
Jesus.
it was run by camp counselors. It was like it's always this system of people are looking to someone for an answer or someone that wants to guide people to an answer. So it's either you got the huge ego issue or you got the huge, I need some answers, I need some direction into my life. And it's like you can even turn religion into a bit of a cult type thing. I mean,
Well, almost even society as a whole, you could classify as a cult if you extended the boundaries of the meaning. Like we have a government, there's a leader. I mean, I'm from Canada, you're from America, but they work same structure, right? There's you got the top dog, you got their disciples, quote unquote, which are their cabinet members or whatever you call them, and we all pay money into it. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing necessarily. Like structure and group can be good as long as it's used for good, I guess, would
yeah,
be the best.
when it's not Bohemian Grove shit, or people are going up into hood outfits and trying to get dirt on each other by making them do dirty things. Once it starts getting in there, I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, there's a line here. If I was going to be a cult leader, which I think in anybody that tries to have a clan or something on Black Ops or does something where they want to create a team or a unit, or even with podcast networks where people are like, I'm going to start a podcast network. You get all the ones that have the same idea of your show kind of and can give you the most grasp on how to make it the better thing. If
Yeah.
I was a cult leader, I wouldn't want to be put in that position because I do a lot of stupid shit and I don't want anybody being responsible for following me in my acts. I'm pretty sure I have a big following in Estonia. I'm saying something out there that resonates with the people down there. So I bet there's probably a couple statues, but there's the issue. I notice I have that ego where it's like I want
Right.
people, I want the compliments, I want the fame factor. So I try and dismiss it because I know if people started building statues after me, I would go too fucking far into my power. I would be like, I want you to bow to me like the Pope. I want that type of cult power where I'm seen as a god rather than a mere man, and that's where the issues set in.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that is an issue when, like, if you start thinking about it too much and you have a following, especially, yeah, as podcasters, we definitely get that. But it's just how you use the power necessarily. If you're using it for a good medium, I mean, you're just having conversations with people. I have a hard time thinking you're doing it for some evil means, but
I'm slowly getting you to spend time with me. This is this is my evilness factor. It's my rub my hands maniacally. But
yeah,
like, all right, from studying or at least looking at some cults and talking about them, what's the worst one you've come across? Because I've only really heard about like I think it's the People's or Heaven's Gate and the People's Temple, which is like the dude John Applewhite who was going on TV letting people know that he was like the son of God and he was getting straight up information from God himself, and that
yeah,
all these people had to kill themselves and a magical space vehicle would take them. I'm reading that, I'm like, I think creativity is needed. Um, but if you're gonna put a fucking paper or plastic bag over your head and suffocate yourself while you're wearing a brand new pair of Nikes like he did in a house with 13 other people, in
yeah,
the hopes that you're gonna be gifted a spacecraft to fly off with the other aliens to a whole nother dimension, I want to know the people that were involved with that, because I think it's like the show Hoarders, where you talk to those people and you're like, so when did you start hoarding? Like, when did this all start happening? And then the person's like, about 10 years ago. And
yeah.
when did your wife die? About 10.5 years ago. It's like, oh, he's
There's the
suppressing.
trauma.
There's
Yeah,
the, yeah. So I want to know the people that were involved in that whole people's or temple thing, where it was like, what at what point did you not question putting a
yeah,
fucking bag over your head and
yeah.
suffocating yourself? Because
And
nobody died at the same rate. They all died at different rates.
oh yeah, and they're all struggling, all suffocating. Yeah. So Heaven's Gate one's actually an interesting one, and it's actually one I'm going to be doing very soon. So this is actually great. So the leader, he and I'm still researching, so this might not be 100%, but um,
I
I
got all
believe
my knowledge from Wikipedia, so I'm all right.
I believe one of his main, uh, I guess you would call it, um, traumas, or if you want to call it that, is that he back in the 50s or something like that was conflicted with whether he was gay or bisexual, and it it isolated him from a lot of people, and it caused his divorce. And back in those days, he was like Texas, I believe. It's not the most forgiving place back in the time for LGBTQ plus members. So that was a big factor in his downfall, you could call it. He was just troubled with that, and not understood as well as he probably should have been, which drove him to be a little bit isolated into a group that um, wasn't the best. So
Well, a matter of suppression, I think that builds up something in all of us where it's like if you've ever been made fun of in school, if you've ever been like the low person on the popularity chain, there's
mhm,
a factor and a dream sequence where it's like you want to be a rock star, you want to be a movie star on the aspect of you want to be loved by people. So like when you look at like a person that has been like picked on, like there are kids in my school, I would walk in and look over and people would be making fun of them 24/7, but they had this
right.
dream or goal to want to become something and be loved by people. It's the reverse of what you've been experiencing for so long. You want to dip your toes into, it's like being in the shallow end of a pool and then you spent your whole life there never even thinking about getting over into the deep end. Then you just decide, screw it, and dive into the deep end. You're like, what was I missing? You want to know what that taste of immortality is like. And I
Yeah.
think the idea of immortality is thrusted upon everyone. This whole human species has wanted to try their best to become everlasting and forever, but I think we've already obtained it. I think the factor is when you look at your kids are basically a piece of yourself that's going to live on. It's going to be a generation that carries on, but no one ever thinks in that factor. They think of, well, it's
Mm.
not my mind, it's not my brain, it's not my body. And that's when we
No,
go like
yeah.
robotics into us, Neuralink and all this stuff. And I'm like, there's cults, there's stuff that probably as a kid, I was probably involved in a bunch of cults. I think the Boy Scouts was one. I think, but it's group thinking, pack mentality style stuff.
Right.
But Girl Scouts were the worst ones because they would sell you with their looks, and then they would charge you a box of Thin Mints for $14.95, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's things like that where it's okay.
Good cookies though.
Yeah, amazing. The almond ones are my favorite. I forgot what they're
Mm.
called. Oh God, what's it called? It's a
See, I'm a fan of the Thin Mints. Those are my favorite, I think. I love the
it's
minty and chocolate.
if you mint and chocolate together, it's like, why don't you just put toothpaste on an Oreo and call it a day? Like, I have questions, but
Let's start that cult.
I think there's a way to do things. And when it comes to the cults that are accepted by society, are the ones we don't really deem as cults, but more like groups or packs. But what does that shift into what makes them a cult? What makes them like the satanic worshiping ones? When if you look at
Yeah.
society, there's just like an alternate timeline or time period where it's like, in what world or other dimension, if me and you were going to hop in a DeLorean and go back in time to where there was a slight butterfly effect, something changed,
Mhm.
where we could sacrifice a chicken in the middle of the road to pray to God that we could have green lights the rest of our way home.
Right.
That could be acceptable in a different time period, but the way as our society has evolved with like the Salem witch trials and all this stuff that happens to do with magic, dark magic, the devil worshiping, all this stuff has
Mhm.
been so influenced that as a society it would be deemed as wrong today, where in some cultures it would be deemed as right.
Yeah, and I would say the difference between, yeah, as you said, governments and like what's the line of cults? I'd say there's a few things that differentiate groups, religious, political, or otherwise, from cults themselves. I would say the main thing is probably that, um, like society and governments, they usually vote upon who gets into power. So it is uh, like there is transfer of power, and I know this is controversial down in the states right now, but there is that, the person in power is not the be all end all leader, and it will change over. But if you look at maybe like a North Korea or something like that, um, that's I would consider that maybe a cult because it is, there's the one leader, one family is the leader basically, and then everyone else is, just at the whim of him, and I'd say that that is where it becomes cult like, is when one group is just following the needs and wants of the one leader, regardless of the, belief system or what have you.
Well, it's the objective, or the, I guess, the quote of power corrupts absolutely.
Mhm.
You know, when you get too much power, there's a weird thing that goes in your head. Like if I was going to give you the role of being president of the United States or the president of a certain state,
I'd
or
resign.
well, in all seriousness, though, if I
Yeah.
was going to give you the power to be able to, run a whole entire country, you would be like, "Oh my God, this is exciting! Thank you so much." Like
Mhm.
it's like having a friend. Like once you're the first like month or two of your new friend, it's really like I got to knock on the door before I walk in. It's all this type of stuff. You're afraid to go to the bathroom if it's
Yeah.
poop or something because you don't the relationship. You don't want to test it yet. But then it's like once you're in it for so long, it becomes like being a best friend where now I can walk up to my best buddy's house without even knocking and just walk in, sit on his couch and start, drinking his root beer, and he just
Yeah.
comes out like waking up like, what the, you're here? I'm like, yeah, I'm not here. And I'm going to vape on your couch. Um,
Yeah.
but being president, it's like you're so accepting, or if you're being a leader, you're so accepting. Thank you, everybody, for doing this. You saw this in The Walking Dead as Rick took his slow shift, where then it turned
Yeah.
into a Ricktatorship, where it's like, we're gonna do what like people voted him in, and
Yeah.
then the power corrupted him to the point of you do what I say, or you get out. And then there's the issue of trying to leave office once the president has to resign, or once a leadership role has to resign, you start to be remorseful. It's graduation goggles when you're walking through high school and you're graduating. You're never going to see these people again. You forget about all the bad times and think about all the missing you're going to have. Same thing with the power. It's all going to be gone and you don't ever want to give it up. And that's why kings are
Yeah.
mostly killed in office, or kings are mostly killed in their power on the throne.
No, that's very true, and yeah, and it's usually why cults end in, like yes, some sort of suicide or something like that because they can't deal with the thought of giving up power. And actually, earlier you asked me what was the worst cult I've studied so far, which is a hard question because it is. Uh,
The Girl
I'd
Scouts.
say a lot of them are, you know, equally as bad. They're all terrible. um, but I'd say the worst one was probably the first one I've done so far, which was Jonestown, um, which is uh, it was a cult that originated. I believe it was in Ohio somewhere, Indiana maybe. I don't know, somewhere down there. They originated there. They moved to California, and they ended up actually moving to uh, somewhere in South America. I'm blanking right now, but
That's the worst type of cults are the ones with legs that move,
yeah.
where it's like this one's traveling all over. We can't pin them down.
Well, and he was moving because he was trying to avoid government suppression and like intervention, basically. So that's why he moved out of the country. Um,
He said intervention. I'm picturing his family sitting him down like, John, we need to fucking talk, man. Let me tell you
uh,
something. You've started this cult and it's turned into something where people are now building statues after you. You need to knock it down a peg.
yeah. So this is probably the worst one because it's about 1,000 people that moved down to South America, and this is actually where the Kool-Aid, don't drink the Kool-Aid, comes in. You've heard that.
Oh, yeah, don't
Um,
drink the Kool-Aid.
yeah. So I think the total was about just over 900 people that suicide in the middle of South America, including children, babies, mothers, all sorts of people, right? And yeah, so far that's the worst one. That's the highest number of deaths, and forced suicide because that's what it was. They forced them basically.
Some of them
Um,
are like, man, it was just really tempting Kool-Aid.
well, you never know. I mean, listen, I wouldn't probably go with. They went grape flavored Kool-Aid. Not my first choice, but
Let me tell you, if somebody goes, "Hey, there's poison in this Kool-Aid," but like a 0.01% chance that you might survive, I'm like,
yeah,
I like those odds, and then I would just fucking down the
I'll
glass,
give it a go. Yeah,
put a little bit of
but
sugar in there.
that is actually, he's a good example of power corrupts, because when he started off, he was actually like an advocate for um, having Black people be like integrated into regular church settings and stuff like that. And he actually got excommunicated from the church because of that. So he was very like forward thinking, where he was like, "We're all equal. Doesn't matter the color of your skin, what you like, what you do in your free time." He's like, as long as you're like dedicated to God and stuff like that, I'll preach for you. I'll do whatever. And he started actually um, doing full Black sermon, or a sermon. I don't know if that's the right word, but church ceremonies where you would have just a full congregate of Black people in his churches, and the church didn't like that, so they kicked him out, and he formed his own thing. Which, there was that isolation. They kicked him out, and that's when he started going a little nutty. He started doing the healing stuff, the healing rituals, and slowly turning insane, where the power just, he started forcing people to give them all their possessions. And um,
There's so many factors that play in all this. Like, did the power corrupt him, or was it like how when if you ever seen the Rick and Morty episode where the guy opens up his own shop and all these things, like these shoes will make you the fastest runner in the world, but then you'll never be able to stop running. There's always
right.
that catch. So was it a guise to play this god-like figure that people could look up to and slowly pull in what you wanted out of it? Like, hey, I'm going to pull
Yeah.
this out of it. It's like if you're the owner of Coca-Cola, you take over the owner sponsorship, you get free Cokes for the rest of your life, but you got to do meetings and stuff. You got to do press conferences. You got to do all the legal stuff. It's like, oh, is
Right.
it worth the fucking Coke Zero cherry? Maybe, but I don't feel like sitting in court for 10 hours. It's like, there's always that, and then there's always someone that wants to look to someone for the answers. We want someone to give us hope. We want someone to give us life. We want someone to
Yeah.
give us something that's going to give us a way of deciding if what we're doing in life is meaningful, is right, is it the process of things? And that's the
Yeah.
factors that all get brought in, where it's like, this is a conglomerate of issues. This isn't his only doing. This is everyone that's involved. We're in a society today where we used to be in groups and we used to have so much, I guess, influence in the way our world was going to run. And then nowadays it seems like we don't have that reaction anymore. There are other people that are doing a higher thing. There are people up
Right.
in the government that are actually affecting policies. You
Companies.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
word doesn't mean anything to a corporate company in Canada that's taking over all their policies. Your town legislation, it might be a small little voice that they can listen to, but they're
Mhm.
going to toss your opinion out in the grand scheme of things when it comes to whatever they want solved. So it's like, it's cult mixed with like secret society shit. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff you got to question where people were like, there's no way the Bohemian Grove was a real thing. And then you find out it is real. It's
Yep.
because it's been so, a lot of stuff that's
Suppressed.
old just is still here, but it's
Yep.
just in a dumber version. The Freemasons used to be Knights of the Templar, where they used to actually do sacrificial things and practice magic and stuff. It's like they still practice magic now, but nobody ever really takes it seriously. It's more like a bond of brothers. It's the whole
Right.
factor of like when you want to hang out with your friends or something, you want a group where it's like a blood oath, where it's like, we're going to be best friends to the end of our days. You want people to agree with you and do fun things. So it's like, there's a way to start a cult, but how do you make it positive? How do you make it something that doesn't corrupt you? So if I
Yeah.
was going to give you the opportunity right now to create a cult, how would you create your cult? What would you start off with? What would you call? Oh, you gotta have a name first.
Oh man. Um. Oh, the Joshua Tree sounds pretty good because I, got my
That's
name.
fucking good, dude. I'm not gonna lie, that's a good one.
That was right off the top of the head too. Not to brag, but that's my almighty being
You're
power
already
is.
getting corrupted.
um, so you're asking how would I start a cult in a way to keep it positive and
Okay,
in a
I'll change the
correct light?
question. How would you start a cult? It doesn't have to be a good one. It doesn't have to be a bad one. I'm gonna give you the reins of control. I'm gonna ask you a little bit of questions, and you're gonna make decisions. Like when you're playing a video game, there's option A, B, C, or D.
Right.
So you already picked your name out.
Yep.
So it's gonna be called Joshua Tree. What is the foundation of the cult? Like what is the goal you want to aspire to your people, to your followers? What are you leading them in with?
I think our core belief, just going on, the uh, the theme of my podcast, it would be that we would suppress all other cults and shame them, and then just make it so that we are doing good by um, tell like telling other cults that they're not as superior as we are. Um,
What would be your first step in action in doing that? So you're going to discern all other cults. Are you going to make a public announcement? Are you going to Yeah, I always tell people, like, I think with social media, we're all technically owning our own cults with followers. I think it's like
yep.
this whole mindset of things, but I'm like, if you really care, which people get religious with their
Oh yeah.
followers, where it's like, yo, I lost a follower. I need to download an app to tell me which follower that was, and then ask them why they unfollowed me because my count is going down. And it's like this whole thing where it's like, oh shit, you're really getting sucked into social media. I tell people, look, if you want actual followers, go to San Francisco, go to where there's a large amount of homeless people, feed them a sandwich. Those people will actually fucking kill for you, not the
Yeah.
Instagram followers. So if you're going to make a press conference to discern all of their followings, would you have to take down social media? Because technically that's everyone starting their own cult.
True. Yeah. You know what? Fuck social media. I'll say it. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast,
I've
but
said it like 10 times. That would be a terrible, like, that's my cult. I can cuss, but you can't. Can you imagine that? Terrible show.
um, yeah. You know what? Social media is actually in the current setting that we have it now. It's a terrible system, and as you said, it is cult like where um, leaders have this ego about them that it's just like, oh, I have 1 million followers and then you only have 900,000. I'm way better than you. And they get paid for it. And um, followers will pay them, companies will pay them, so they're making money off of this. And then at the same time, the followers themselves are dedicated. Like they will defend you. Like that, you got that core probably. I don't know. What would you say? 20% that would die for you, like a regular social media person that they follow. They probably about 20% of that million would kill for you, and then you got the fans that'll defend you. They won't, you know, die for you, and then you got the flip floppers. So I think yeah, social media is definitely a not a great thing for sure.
Do you think it would
Mentally,
play in a bigger factor if we look at John Applewhite or something? Would his
hmm,
grasp be bigger if he had social media at that point, or would it be
yes,
something that would stop him? Because he was using TV and coming out saying all this religious stuff on television where people would turn it on and get it. But imagine if other people had more information, social media was as big as it is now back then. Would it help or hurt? Because I look at it like maybe it would hurt
yeah,
because people are already confined to believing in one thing. You see people that follow a page, they'll follow a bunch of them, but a
right.
lot of them really only interact with a certain few.
I'd love to say that you're right and it would help, but I have my doubts, you know, with the rise of QAnon and flat earthers, and I don't know where you stand on any of this, but and
There's some of your audience right there when you were talking about discerning other cults. That's the QAnon people. They're fucking
yeah,
attacking on that one.
which I mean, yeah, it's good to be skeptical of things that are happening in the world, but they take it to another level, I think, and but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Those people have gone way into the cult per se. Like they don't believe you should anti-vaxxers. They don't believe you should like vaccinate anyone. And it's
I'll
like,
stick up for myself on this. I'm not anti-vax, but
okay,
I was joking around a few months ago about the vaccine for coronavirus. I said it was
right,
like I Am Legend. Just wait 6 months, and then you start hearing people are suffering from severe things. The
yeah,
issue with QAnon is the idea of stopping pedophiles in the belief that it's that big of an issue, which honestly, from
yeah.
working in hotels, I don't think it's as severe as an issue as media is putting it out to be. I
But
th-
what they do is their big thing is like it's hard to fight against that idea, right? You can't say, oh, there's not that, like we shouldn't worry about pedophiles because that's hard to say, right? Like, and it is true though. There are pedophiles in the world. There are sex traffickers and terrible people like that. But to the degree that they think it is, I think it's way
yeah,
less.
that's what I'm saying.
And like, it,
Because the issue is when you're trying to even talk bad against it. Like I had my buddy who was like pro Biden,
right,
but then he was always putting up hashtag stop pedophilia. I'm like, bro, it came out that he is a pedophile. Like, I think the biggest issue is it's in our government. It's in the system because of the way it's come out as to hold a crime over somebody's head in our government system is to get them to do something that if it ever came out, they would be trashed by everyone. It's the
right,
same thing with every like Bob Lazar with the Area 51 and Sector 7 and all that.
mhm,
He was in the newspaper for designing a rocket bike, and
right,
there was so much information that called him a conspiracy theorist, called him a liar, called him a thief, called him a propagandist, called him all this lies and stuff for 30 something years where nobody would believe him. But then somebody decided to make a documentary about him and then show all the proof of how the government screwed him over. All
yep,
that came out, people lost their shit. They
yep,
wanted to storm Area 51. Then he goes and says, "Guys, I was just saying that. I was just saying that." It was a man who didn't want people to die.
right,
All that
right,
stuff is true, which the government has came out saying we've identified unidentified flying objects that we
yep,
can't explain where they come from. So it's like, holy shit, they really ruined this guy's life. But it's the way they made Alex Jones look. They made
yeah,
Alex Jones look like a fucking insane, crazy ass person when he's right about a lot of shit. And
yeah.
that's just because of the way the media can distort it.
Sure. I with Alex Jones though, however, I would say he does just throw shit at the wall, so it is on him as well. He
Yeah.
just, you know, any conspiracy, he just throws it, and then it, like if it
My
sticks, it
my
sticks.
power with him is like pause it every 3 minutes when he goes on a rant because
And
he's
then
going,
Google.
yeah, because he's going off on so many directions. It's like my mind. There's so many avenues to choose. I'm like,
Yeah.
you got to stick one and then go with it. But then also to enforce his opinion, he makes up a statistic and makes up something where
Yeah.
it's like, find that. You were
Yeah.
right about it, but then we got to cut you off right here because that
Yeah.
part right there is bullshit.
No, and that's, yeah, that's what all I'd say about him is just, like, take everything. Well, and this is a good for anything you see on social media or anything like that. Take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, there's so many studies and like documentaries that have come out that are like social media will show you what you want to see, whether it's right or not. So always take it with a grain of salt, whether it's yeah, QAnon stuff, Alex Jones stuff, or even like, yeah, as you said, pro Biden stuff or whatever. Like there's always going to be a bias in a story online, especially on social media. And then if it'll feed into your biases and then just reinforce your beliefs, which is, I think, the biggest issue with social media, and why um, I would say these cult like groups are reforming at such a high rate nowadays, because um, that's all it does. It just reinforces those beliefs, and people get stuck in these groups where they feel isolated from everyone else. Because I mean, like if I had a friend that was a anti-vaxxer, let's say, um, and they were always preaching about it, I would probably not be their friend for very long, because I would like it just wouldn't, like, and then they get isolated and then they just dig in further. And that's all social media does, is it just divides people. It doesn't bring people together as much as we like to think it does.
It's the issue between difference of looking up a web article and then looking up into a book. If
Mhm.
I, we decided to look up something about being vegan, if we type that in on the internet, it's going to tell us what vegan is.
Right.
This is vegan. It's eating vegetables. It's not eating meat. It's all this type of stuff. But then if we look at the book's going to say this is what vegan is. This is the positive effects of it. This is the negative effects for some. This is what the
Yep.
concept of it behind it gives you, this whole other information that Google's not going to give you unless you type it in exactly. So someone
Exactly.
types in what is QAnon, it gives them a description of what it is, but then not the other shit. You have
Yeah.
to find this stuff in a book. And that's the issue of, like, with social medias. Same thing with when someone says something. Nobody ever does their own research anymore. They just decide that this is true. I'm going to
Or
run with this.
or their research is just the articles that they get fed from Facebook or Twitter or whatever, what have you, or from the group itself. There, and they get sent an article, and they're like, "Oh, this must be true," and they don't go outside of that bubble. They don't go to, yeah, like a, I don't know, like a university art, like a paper, or like a book itself, or it's whatever they see on Facebook, and that's their quote unquote research. And it, it's not productive, because it's usually just what you agree with, and people like that because it's a dopamine hit. You're like, oh, I'm right, like, and then this has reinforced that belief. um
It's like the
and
Red Hot Chili Peppers when they were, big. There were all these fans that loved them, and then next thing you know, Anthony Kiedis and then John Frusciante split up. Then there are people that followed John Frusciante, and there are people that stuck with Anthony Kiedis. It
yeah,
was the whole aspect of, like, you're with social media, it has literally created this thing where instead of connecting us together, it's actually made us more separate. And the reason why is the amount of stuff that gets thrown into it, such as if you created, let's take Joshua Tree. When
yep,
you take your Joshua Tree cult, somebody likes everything you've said, but then you said one thing that they don't like, so they decide to take all the qualities of Joshua Tree, but then there's this little subcategory that makes
yep.
it different from yours. And then
Come
now
after
there's
a
like
sapling.
eight 80,000 branches off Joshua Tree that are all different
Yeah,
things, and none of them are connected really to you anymore. Where it's like,
yeah.
okay, then we're so isolated now, where instead of having groups of billions and thousands or hundreds, whatever, it's now getting divided into tens and fives and fours and
Couple dozen,
threes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's true, and that is the issue with social media, that there is this more of a divide than there is um, a one overarching group. And not to say that I would like an overarching group, because I think it is good to have differing opinions and ideas, but not to the extremes that we have right now. I think there has to be some like root in reality where it's like uh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something for vaccines that could be like
My biggest fear is
I don't
that
know.
with the way the cult has kind of transformed into the world today, which everything seems like it's okay, influenced into our society, is that social media, that if you probably Google right now about people that maybe have lost their Instagram accounts, lost their Twitter accounts, that had a severely high following, what level of depression spiked in their life? How many people have taken their own lives? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
being like with the QAnon, the example was, imagine being a high level wizard in World of Warcraft and your account got banned forever. People looked up to you when you died. People looked up to you as you were the all-seeing God. It was like having the cheat codes to life, or you could just be like infinite money, snap your fingers and you give them to like a lower person on the chain.
Yeah.
When that happens with social media and you lose your whole following, you got to restart from scratch. A lot of people, after a month or so of trying to restart from scratch and not getting the progress they want, depression hits. You don't
Yeah.
feel loved. And that's the issue with a like and a share and all these things on social media, is that they don't mean shit.
No.
But in our minds, they mean everything. And that dopamine rush that you get feeling like somebody's hearing you,
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, cults are going to be more and more nowadays, but it's going to evolve into social media where lives are actually going to be taken, not
Yeah.
on the aspect of we're following Johnny Applewhite and he wants us to drink Kool-Aid.
But
There's a question in your head there.
you could even argue that it has happened. There's a few, and I'm not clear on the details, so please do your research for this one. But I've heard that Facebook, when it went over to Africa, I believe, some countries in Africa, and they just rushed in there as fast as they could. They supplied them internet, and their platform with WhatsApp and stuff like that. And that was like it was very few things that were available. And the issue was Facebook. There was main Facebook, the main Facebook language of the country. And if you couldn't speak that language, which in Africa there are many different languages in a single country, you became the minority very quickly and segregated from Facebook. So you were no longer part of these Facebook groups. And it's caused race wars in Africa where these Facebook groups are just uh, like they're the superior race, quote unquote, and they just attack the other races, ethnicities, other languages, and it's caused this race war where I believe quite a few people have died from it. Like I said, this is a
Well, it's my issue with cults and what censorship, how they both go hand in hand.
Hmm,
Censorship now is going to start breeding more cult-like thinking. The
yeah,
issue is you can't censor things. Sadly, there are some things that are like, you don't want that if it really affects a certain race, a certain person. It's like bullying kind of. You don't want to do that. But you can't
right.
tell people they can't express themselves. I think
No,
the issue is when someone does express themselves in a way that is seen as racist or something like that, you should have the common sense and the knowledge to be like, that person's a piece of shit. And then
right.
you ignore that person, you shame that person. The people should do so.
Yep,
But when a system that's supposed to not affect your freedom of speech, for instance, starts
like
telling
Twitter.
you, yeah, starts saying you can't say something, it's what Orville said on the idea of censorship in media, is that you're going to literally make a dumb population. When you start banning words, you start banning sayings of things you
Yeah,
can't say, then people aren't going to know what those things are. So then that's never going to be a thing that's going to be in their vocabulary. If I decided to just use modern day slang from the Urban Dictionary instead of using the actual dictionary, if I ban those words, you're not going to know what intellect is. You're not going to know what boondoggle is. You're not going to know what
yeah.
petrichor is. Your vocabulary is going to be some so dumbed down where it's like, today the bird went to the store and
Which
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could argue that is what social media is doing. We have that 280 character limit, and but I would say this about Twitter. I have liked what they've been doing recently, especially with the election. Trump will tweet something, and Twitter will just put out like an information tag on it and say this might be misleading information. And I think that's brilliant because what it does is it allows people to still say what they want to say, but it gives that people in the when they look at it, it gives them in the back of their mind that, oh, this might not be true. Maybe I'll look into it. So it doesn't suppress necessarily. It allows people to think for themselves and think critically. I believe.
My issue is when they start choosing sides on the platforms of social media. The issue
Right.
when it came to Facebook, for instance, Mark Zuckerberg was pro Biden. So right when the laptop stuff broke out, that he was, that Biden was this crazy creep with all these underage pictures of his son had on his computer and stuff, and there was this whole pedophilia thing on him, and all these
Right.
journals that came out. Facebook, Instagram, how they're both connected. Instagram took off on the hashtag of any hashtag, anything. You can look up review, hashtag podcast, hashtag cult, hashtag whatever. They took out
Yep.
the latest. So you can't see the newest post for that hashtag. And at the top, it said,
Oh,
we have disabled all recents for every hashtag in case it might affect the polling of the election.
I see.
But if something like that came out with Trump, nobody would have said a damn thing. Nobody would have done that. That's where I'm
You're
saying
right.
you
Yeah.
can't act like you're doing a good act
Yeah.
when you're obviously picking a side. You
No,
that's
that's fair. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's where we're trying to figure out where social media lies within the spectrum of our society. Because whether we like it or not, it is part of our society now, and it is a big thing that influences people. So I definitely agree that yeah, if Trump says or does anything, it's like all over Facebook, all over Instagram, and they don't suppress that, which I think is good. And then on the other side, I believe suppressing the other side is a terrible or yeah, like suppressing people from commenting on the other side is a terrible thing as well, because it does that. And it also, I think it does affect the polls probably negatively anyway from what they want, because the people are like, oh, that's weird. And then they start thinking, and then they start going to these groups where they're like, oh, they're suppressing because they're, deep state or whatever it happens to be. And they don't want Trump to win, stuff like that,
it's
which,
you got a horse in the race and you're
yeah,
cheating by hurting the other horses to get your horse ahead. I'm not pro Trump, I'm not pro Biden, I'm not pro anything.
I'm
Um,
Canadian, so I have no stake in the game.
Honestly,
Well,
I was getting pissed at people that were tossing out like it's your civic duty to vote. I'm like, you don't even know how to do your fucking taxes. Don't give me that.
yeah,
But on the aspect of when, let's say, if me and you were going in an election or something, if you started saying information and
yeah,
I can
I'd
look
win.
up, well, probably. But if you could start saying information where I would have to Google it or something, there would be an issue with the fact of nobody's wants to Google that because you said something and nobody's suppressing it. Nobody's saying this isn't true. Nobody's saying this. So
Right.
you take it and you run with it. Like what he said is true. But then if I come out and say something and people immediately put a ban on it, start banning all this stuff, people go, obviously he's wrong. Obviously he's wrong. Obviously he's wrong. Maybe I'm right, but it's something they don't want other people to know. And that's the question that doesn't get brought in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair enough as well. And like I said, that is why I think what Twitter is doing is smart. They're still allowing people to say what they want to say, just flagging it as maybe misinformation. You know what I mean? So it's like they can still see the tweet that the person made. They can still make their own decision about that tweet. It's just it gives people that extra layer of oh, maybe I should do look into this a little more. And not to say that they aren't being biased towards one side. They definitely should toe that line in the middle, which is hard to do with humans. It's all we're all biased, and that is why cults exist. Basically, is because of our biases. But as much as they can toe that line between the middle, where they're more of a partisan like They just flag everything that they see as maybe misinformation rather than just a certain side.
Seems like the core issue with censorship is the fact that you should be looking for your own information. When you
Yep.
start looking for a system or a certain social networking thing to be able to tell you what's wrong and what's right, you should have the thought in your head when somebody tweets something or says something like the articles with the laptop and stuff. I did my own research on that and I was like, damn, it is true. It's not as crazy as they're making it sound, but there is some lobbying going on. There is some
Yep.
things going on in here that we need to pay attention to, that should be aware, but nobody ever does that. They hear something, like I had somebody tell me, no, it's all false. It's all fake news. It's all this type of stuff. I'm like, no, it's everywhere. Like
Yeah.
they tell me to check my sources. I'm like, it's everywhere. Like I've checked all over the internet. This isn't
Yeah.
like some one article or a Washington Post something. This is a straight up all the news sources, even the ones that are on this Democratic Party or Republican Party, are saying it's
Yeah.
a true thing. So it's like there's the denying, and then you got to really find that question in your head where people should always ask themselves, is this true? It's like we do it for reviews on products. People hate all the movies I fucking love. Every movie, Norbit, like people hate that movie. People hate Green Lantern. People hate all these movies I find that are amazing and one of my favorites. Doesn't I did my own research. I love
Yeah.
that movie.
Oh, it
And
doesn't, yeah, and it doesn't detract from like what you love basically. And I think that's how more people should live their lives is if I enjoy this thing and it's not hurting anyone, fuck it. I'll enjoy this thing. Like I don't have to be told that I'm wrong or stuff like that. If it gets into the point of weird when it's affecting other people's lives and suppressing other people, that's when I'm like, yeah, okay, like believe what you want to believe, but if it's hurting other people, then it's like there's gonna be some pushback from myself anyway, you know.
there's a page out there on Instagram called Bill Cosby's Innocent. Just let that sink in.
Oh no. Well, and there's like the OJ stuff and
It's the blind truth, I call it.
Crystalia.
I've been
Yeah.
calling this for a while, is the blind truth is that you're so in love and infatuated with something that if anything comes out that's bad, you're not looking at redemption for that person. You're looking at it as denying it and calling it false information. And that's the issue, is if you think Bill Cosby's innocent, you should look at the factor of he did do these things.
Yep.
So how do we recover him from this? How do we, instead of denying it and saying it's not true, how do we look at it and be like, it happened? Let's try and get on track in your life and get you the help you need to become the person that we've always believed you to be.
Well,
That's the thing.
and now we're getting into the way prison systems work basically, which is um yeah, more of a revenge than a
Wait,
necessarily
are you telling
rehabilitation.
me there's an issue with our prison system?
With yours specifically, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know Canada's too well because we don't hear about it as much. We hear about your media more than ours, but
Everybody hears about us more. We're in
yeah.
the spotlight. I'm waiting until Biden's in office for a good year and then we get knocked out of the spotlight. It's going to be some other nation. It's going to take number one. We're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, because with the way we treat criminals and the way we treat people who have done horrible things, like let's take Bill Cosby for an example. Yeah, he did tons and tons of terrible things to many women, and what he's done to those women can't be undone. It's been done. It's horrible, and he's in jail for it. Correct? Like
Yeah.
he's yeah, and what I would hope is what they're doing is in these prisons taking him to a psychiatrist or some form of
They're
um
not doing anything like
yeah,
that.
but that's what I would hope for prisoners or people who have done terrible things, is that they get that help that they need so that they can reintegrate into society and actually understand what they did was wrong. Because right now it's we're going to lock you up. We're going to make you think about what you did for 10 to 15 years, however long it is. And you're just going to have to figure out what you did was wrong by yourself. You're not going to get any support from us, and you're going to be surrounded by people who have also done, terrible things and
He's
are
done
just
other stuff too. The fact he took off Little Rascals off the shelves, you can't watch that anywhere. There was a whole thing about the Little Rascals. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. When I was a kid, it was pretty
heard of it.
big. Well, he bought it all. He bought all the rights to it and then shelved it and never let it air anywhere. He owns the rights. Nobody can air that anywhere. And he said it was because it was racist. That's why he censored it.
Oh,
That's
I
that's a
see.
that's 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 a good thing he did, which was
Right.
censoring it and shelving it. But the
Yep.
issue is if you don't have that out there for people to look at and go, this is fucking terrible, then you don't raise that question for people to say that so they can't address that. As a
Right.
society, evolving doesn't mean closing things out and canceling it. It means looking at something and knowing why you think differently now.
Yep.
Why are you different? It's why you can't cancel comedians. It's why you can't cancel actors. This whole act of cancel culture, it's not a it's not a factor of wanting this person to never be able to work or never be able to have a life again, because that just breeds more hatred in his mind to breed onto his kids.
Yeah.
Look at it as a society, we've evolved and we don't think like that anymore. So you either evolve with us or you're going to be left in the dust.
Yeah.
That's the mentality we need to have. We need to look
Yeah.
at things where I look at shows nowadays where they introduce like the Jeffersons, or they introduce something where it's like, why did it take so long for TV to decide to throw a black person in, or throw two dads in, or throw this in? And realize as a society, we don't think on this mindset anymore. And that was the thinking back then. You look at the
Yeah.
Native Americans, they ate their own people. We're not doing that now, but nobody ever talks about that stuff. We look at that
Right.
as like, we don't talk about that. You should talk about it and see how that was their thinking of that time period. We're
So
at a way more evolved state.
fun fact and a little bit of an offshoot of what you just said. So I was actually playing some video games with one of my buddies who's a Mohawk actually, and this just happened like literally Saturday night. He was telling me about like how Mohawks were like like the terrible Native American peoples where they would they would like eat people and stuff like that. And he was telling me about it, and he's like, "Yeah, it's wild that you just don't know about this." And I was like, we just don't learn it. We don't learn it in school." And I mean, it's fascinating stuff, like terrible stuff, obviously, but
That's why
fascinating nonetheless.
during the whole like statues taken down, people were screaming about how our presidents were all fake and all this stuff. And I was a little bit too like, hey, like George Washington's teeth were made of slave teeth. Like they weren't
Right.
cherry wood. But they don't tell you that because it doesn't look good to your president if you
Yep.
start thinking that much. But you need to look at that as the Indians, it wasn't just us taking their land. They murdered each other. They ripped each other apart and ate each other. It was the mindset of
Some of
where
them.
they, well, there was a mindset of that's their thinking back then. They didn't
Yeah.
know any better. Our ideas of morals evolved with our policies and the way our society progresses. It's the same reason if you go to a lower, there's a island out there. I forgot what it's called, but there's like a total population of 39 people on there, and we've just learned, like it's like the movie The Village. They don't know about all these things that are out there because they refuse to evolve. They refuse to
Right.
progress. We're banned from ever going to that island. And the one person that tried to in like 2006 flew his plane over and they shot arrows into his plane. He
Right.
came out
Right.
with a Bible trying to get them to find the way of God, and they tried to murder him because
I
they
think they
have
did.
their set of thinking. They have their
Yeah.
mindset. We look at that, don't look at it as they need to change. Look at it as a society, we have progressed and we don't
Yep.
think like that anymore. Our idea of the word barbarian is always constantly evolving.
Yep. No, that's a great way to put it. And I mean, I agree that we probably shouldn't be suppressing media or stuff from the past. It is good to look at to see what was. I think maybe just to play devil's advocate, I think maybe their thinking is that uh, if we show people this, it will keep those stereotypes, those terrible things within our society. And I,
It's the
I,
power when you own an app as Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg has the power of control. He
yep,
can take your profile off Facebook, how big as it might be, and just decide I'm going to trash it.
Yep.
That's the issue when the power of control comes in. The issue is that we can't have most conversations in the world don't happen like how me and you are having right now, where it's just
Mm.
people chatting. It's always got to be somebody getting a game, or somebody's got to get something out of it. Something's got to be a promotion for themselves. Something's got to be like, I got to do my own recording in case you use
I'm on
something.
here. I'm on here to promote my podcast.
Yeah, well, obviously, like I want you to
Just kidding.
too, but it's the idea of everybody either wants something for themselves or thinks it's
Right.
going to be an attack. Such as like you could be like, I got to record in case, he uses this in a way where he isolates some of my things that I say and turns it against me. There's
Yeah.
always that thinking, and that's just because as a society, we never want to be like we're not in the control factor. We're not in the control seat.
Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta just you just gotta be more simple, where it's like, let's just talk like how we did back in the day before recordings ever came out.
Yeah.
Sadly, this is the easiest way to be able to do so without having, I don't know, to go visit each other, or having to go like randomly come across each other. Social media has
Right.
gave us this positive avenue to go down towards. Don't let it corrupt, because as we with the power corrupts, absolutely, social media can corrupt a hell of a lot faster. It's like a fucking avocado, where you can only cut it one day in a certain week in that hour, and if you miss that hour window opportunity, it's fucking done.
Yeah. And we're past that hour. We're well into the brown stage. Um, no, I think that's brilliant. That's what we need to do. We need to, have these conversations and allow conversations to happen where we're not suppressing voices or people. That being said, voices that do suppress other people, that's where I'm not sure about. Like, do we suppress voices that advocate for suppressing other voices? And then do we also then become those voices that are suppressing? And it feels like this constant cycle where it's like, well, where's the line? Where do we draw the line? Um,
Control
and
used to be just in your own life, and then that
yeah,
control used to be when you had a family. If you were the father figure, you would control your own families.
yep,
Then eventually your kids turn 18 and you lose that control. They have to think for themselves. This is the issue, is that you need to understand you need to have control in your own life first, and not trying to focus on everybody else's life. The
yep,
issue is with the idea of suppression is we want to suppress our own problems and focus on other people's, but then we hone into those and we make them bigger issues than what they are.
right,
You need to let people try and find the control into their own lives. You shouldn't be telling people to vote. You shouldn't be telling people to do anything. You should be focusing on your own and your own family. Focus
yep,
on the loyalty, but also don't be afraid to help other people when they need it. But don't be the fucking captain of their own ship, because everyone's their own boat captain in their own life. They got to sail where they got to go.
yeah. No, and that's the thing. Like, if you truly, and we can talk specifically politics for this one, if you truly believe one side or the other benefits you directly, then you shouldn't necessarily feel bad about voting for who you vote for. I mean, listen, again, I'm Canadian. I'm completely out of the politics
You
game.
have no power here.
But if you truly believe that neither Trump or Biden have your best interests at heart, and that some third party like fucking Kanye maybe has your best interests at heart, then go for it. Vote independent. Vote someone that isn't one of the main two parties. It doesn't have to be a two-party system down there. You guys can have multiple parties if you need to, but just yeah, focus on what affects your life, whether it's taxes, healthcare, what have you, and then vote for that. Vote for your congressman who's gonna fight for those things for you, and and like don't worry about how they're gonna affect other people. That sounds terrible, but your family comes first, and then if you're comfortable where you are, that's when you start looking at helping other people and maybe either donating or voting for the interests of other people. But you got to get your ducks in order before you start branching out to help other people, I think. And that's the issue is we're both selfish and selfless in this like social media society. We want those follows, we want those likes, but we want to help each other before we help ourselves, basically.
I'm joining cult Joshua Tree. You have swayed my vote, sir.
We're accepting new members. You just have
Right?
to.
Do I have to sacrifice a chicken?
No, you have to actually give me all your material possessions so that you're lifted from the.
That is literally how most cults go. Like
Yep.
you have to lose your material objects, and that's grounding you to this earth. So I'll hold them for you.
So that God will accept you. Yeah. Some bullshit. But
Well, Josh, why don't you promote your podcast, man? You've given me enough of your time, brother.
awesome. Yeah. So if you want to check me out, it's Let's Start a Cult podcast. You can check me out at www.letsstartacultpodcast.com. On Twitter and Instagram, it's let's_cult. Yeah, we talk about cults. I teach you a different cult every episode. I have some great guests on, and we have good conversations, usually about terrible people. Yeah, so if you wanna learn more about cults and a little bit about how there's some of them are still around, which is awful and terrible, then yeah, feel free to come check me out.
You turn in a bad topic into a interesting, fun one.
Well, that's what we try to do anyway, and sometimes it gets too terrible to make it that fun part, but definitely interesting for sure.
Just bring out finger sandwiches. That's always a pleasurable thing.
Yeah.